So, hi, would you like to
Hi.
introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Aimee Carrero, and I think we've met through the tabletop role playing game world via Twitter, and my work on Critical Role. Is that right?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Cool.
Aimee Carrero is a wonderful actress, and today she's going to be telling me about her adventures in the tabletop gaming scene. What was it like when you first sat at a D&D session? What was going through your head the first time?
Well, it's interesting because my background is in acting. I've only ever really done on-camera work. I mean, I've done some voiceover work, but that is still scripted.
Yeah.
As part of my training as an actor, I've done some improvisation. And so the way that Dungeons and Dragons was sort of like pitched to me was that it was a long form improvisation. And so because of that, I felt confident in the role playing aspect of it, but I didn't feel super confident with the mechanics. Not to dissuade anyone from Dungeons and Dragons because it is so much fun, and once you're in, it's like you're in. But it is a
Yeah.
little bit like learning a new language, or I felt like it was that for me. I'm not really like super math brained.
Yeah.
Not to say that I can't do it. I just, it's one of those things where I feel more creative than I do. I don't know, maybe like logistical. So I felt confident in the character portion, but I didn't feel super confident in like knowing all the rules. And I didn't want to slow the table down with my sluggish, understanding of the rules.
It's a bit of that intimidation tactic with all the
Yeah.
mechanics overall.
Yeah. And also, it didn't help that I knew that it was going to be broadcast for thousands of people. So I think if my first campaign was in my living room, I maybe would have been slower to try to learn all the rules. But in the end, that actually ended up being a really good thing because having that um, sort of like performative, or not performative in a bad way, but like sort of the performance pressure for a performer is really good. It gives you the amount of adrenaline that you need to get going and to get past your nerves at a certain point. So, I was nervous at first, and then I immediately, when I started playing, I knew that I was kind of in my zone as far as performance goes.
Oh yeah, that makes sense, and that actually leads into our next two questions, which is perfect.
Great.
So the next question is about, the unseen session zero games that we got little glimpses of in the little preview for EXU. Do you think
Yes.
those helped you in your confidence and establishing your character overall?
100% was so. I can't imagine having crafted Opal, which is the character I play, on Exandria Unlimited, which is sort of like a mini campaign from the Critical Role folks, and because I actually brought in a different character that I did in my test audition. So
Yeah.
because Critical Role is streamed for thousands of people, and it was kind of like their first, I think, well, it wasn't their first mini campaign. They'd done like on Deadwood, and they'd done guests for one shots and stuff, but this was going to be part of like the canon of Critical Role of Exandria. So I think, they tried out a few people. And so when I came in, I had maybe like a week to prepare a character. So I brought in a character that sort of eventually became Denise, kind of has nothing to do with Denise now, but that it was like the rough outline of Denise. And then once we got the group together, I think we all kind of got a feel for the characters we were all playing. And I thought, well, the thing that would help me the most as a player here is to play a character that was a little bit naive and a little bit didn't know what the hell she was doing, because I also didn't know what the hell I was doing. So it was a great device so that when I seemed like totally green, which is, showbiz word for
Yeah.
like don't know anything, then I could do it as my character.
Yeah.
Do you want me to repeat that? Sorry.
No, you got it.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that I don't know if that answers your question, but it was crucial because you get to kind of fumble, and you get to kind of get through the stuff that isn't necessarily something that hundreds of people want to sit through, you know, like you trying to figure out your character. At one point I was playing Ted and Opal at the same time.
Yeah.
So I was kind of talking to myself, and I needed that session or those sessions to know that actually that didn't really work out for me. It's just better if Abria played Ted. So, you know, I think it was totally crucial. It's not necessary for you to have a good time when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop RPGs, but if you're going to stream it and you want people to be entertained, then it's a good idea.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of Opal and Denise, they both do seem rather different from each other, if I do say so myself, which kudos to you, because I've personally noticed that trying to get that can be a little bit hard when it comes to characters, and I'm really impressed by that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, but focusing on Opal for just a second, with her journey so far, has there been more exploring on an emotional level with it than you maybe initially expected, or even on a creative level? Do you think her development at all mirrors your continuing experience and confidence in the game?
Yes, I think that the more confident I get, the more lore I know. You know, I guess maybe that's not the order in which it goes. The more I play, and the more I play with Matt and with the Critical Role folks and Abria, and I understand the lore, and the more I watch Critical Role. So like I got to see Calamity, which is a prequel to where we are now, or how we got to where we are in Exandria. The more lore I understand, the more confident I become. You know, when I first started playing Opal, I would like stumble upon lore that I had no idea, but it was like a really big part of the story. So there's this one episode where Opal has a nightmare or a vision of this god, right, or this goddess, and she looks like a spider. So Aimee, the character, when I'm relaying this to the other characters, was like, I don't know, she's some sort of spider queen, which ended up being like a real, you know, that was just like great luck that's, you know, kind of how I described her. So, but once you kind of know the world, it's just easier to make informed choices, bolder choices, and kind of do it with like your whole chest, if that makes sense, without sort of like being so trepidatious around the world. You can just do something and see how it plays out. And as far as like the emotional part of Opal, that's what I felt most comfortable with. So one of the biggest kind of, I don't want to say like shockers of, it's hard to articulate this, so, you know, follow me if you can, but
no worries,
because my ADHD is like terrible. But the thing with actors, right, like the way that we're trained is we're trained to sort of like read a script and immediately identify what the conflict is between the characters, because that's what makes a story entertaining, is conflict, right? If people were sort of, if you're just watching like a perfectly happy married couple go to the farmer's market and pick out produce, you probably don't want to watch that scene. You know what I mean? You want to maybe like they pick out the produce, and on the way back home, you know, they run into someone's ex-girlfriend, you know, their partner's ex or whatever, and then all of a sudden the scene becomes about that, even though it's about the produce, if that makes sense. So there has to be like an emotional conflict, or a physical conflict or whatever. So that's how I came at it as an actor. And what I realized with at least the Critical Role audience is that they rely on the dungeon master to create the conflict, and not so much the characters to relate to sort of bring the conflict. And when a character does bring a conflict, it's very it's not always super well received, if I am putting it delicately, you know, like they sometimes confuse you for your character. So I'd read comments like, Aimee's so self-involved, she's such a bitch. And I'm like, well, no, I'm playing a character who has like totally main character syndrome because she's so naive. It's the first time she's been out in the world. And this is how this character behaves. And I thought that would bring like a nice sort of conflict and balance to the story, where you had like, Liam's character, who is like very kind of mature and like self-possessed and knows a lot about the, world. And I was also playing with a character like, Dariax, who is also kind of, a little bit of a himbo, but like Matt understands the rules. So I thought it might be like a fun choice to bring a character that was a little ditzy, a little bit kind of like, I don't know, everything good just happens to me, and that wasn't it wasn't like I just had come at it with I thought I would be a better player. It would be more interesting for the story if Opal made some like kind of selfish choices, because I came at it from an actor's perspective. And then I realized through playing this game that this isn't really why people play the game. They play the game so that they can be on a team, they can work together, they can have adventures and as a whole, and the dungeon master via like the big bads or the obstacles creates the conflict. And that's something that I didn't really understand going in, but that's okay. I think it's just a different way of playing.
Well, I actually admire that about the Opal character, because I do enjoy the conflict, and it was sort of, if you don't mind me saying, very interesting to see when that sort of switch seemed to happen for you, like during the EXU campaign. I can't remember the exact moment, but it was very telling for the character, and it made me really forward to her future. And then all the other stuff happened to her future, but I won't say that in case there's anybody who hasn't seen it yet, who isn't watching.
Right, I know, big spoiler alert, but I think that also speaking to Abria, they were all cool with it. Everybody on the Critical Role team was very much into that, because I think Abria wanted to explore in this campaign, and that campaign wanted to explore power and the concept of like, does it corrupt? Is it innately evil, or is it totally neutral? And it just depends on the hands that it is in, I guess. So I think Opal was a good vehicle for that. Every character had the option of putting the circlet on. Every character had the option of, if they roll really badly, Abria would say, how badly do you want this? And you could roll again, but there was always sort of like a tainting of your what's it called? I don't want to call it a soul, but like, I think
your
Fern's
aura?
hand I think like somebody's hand like turned like black or something from like doing messing with the power or something like that. I found that really interesting. So it's not the way everybody likes to watch it or play it, but I think it's cool to watch. And I don't know what's going to happen with Opal, but wouldn't it be cool to watch the corruption of a character? Like, wouldn't that be cool? Or wouldn't it be cool to watch somebody who's totally naive fall into maybe like a bad situation and then pull herself out of that, like a Xena warrior princess sort of arc? Like, wouldn't that be cool and interesting? So I'm open.
Yeah. You see, something with the community in general I've noticed is that there is a fear of creativity at times because of rocking the boat. But that was going to be a question, but you've already answered that pretty well with the whole, you need to have like the confidence to like be willing to try.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's fun about performance, but I understand that some people play the game for different reasons. Not everybody wants to do it because they want to kind of create a fun character and sort of live vicariously or whatever. Some people just, they love the mechanics, and that's a completely valid way to play, like, how can I make this character, a total fighting machine, or how can I make them this or whatever? I think there's no wrong way to play,
Yeah, exactly. There's something for everybody in it, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
What's next on this list?
I know, I'll just keep talking forever. Sorry.
Oh, no, you can go ahead. I'm completely fine with it. Let's see. Speaking of, the mechanics, the dice, tell the story overall, besides, some character choices. Is there anything about either of your current characters, Opal or Denise, even though we haven't really talked about the niece yet, that you would have performed differently if the dice hadn't been a factor?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. You know what? I'm sure. Like, yeah, I'm positive that I would have. And maybe this just goes back to like I don't know if you've ever taken an acting class or an improv class or anything, but the first thing they teach you is it's like the yes and, right? Like, you just go with it, and you try not to be like, well, no, I'm not going to do that, or, because it doesn't really move the story along. You always try to be open. So I'm sure it would have led me somewhere else. I wish I had like a tangible example, but one of the big joys for me of playing like Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop role-playing game is the fact that you don't really know when you sit down at the table. You don't know where you're going to end up, and that's kind of the fun. So, sometimes you really want to do this cool, flourish or this cool move, or you have this like great idea, but the dice just doesn't roll your way, and that's part of the story. And that's, I guess, a lot of the conflict comes from that too. So, yeah, I'm sure, and I wish I had like a funny anecdote, but I tend to try to just stay in the moment and go with the flow, and that's part of the rush of playing the game for me. So,
Well, you definitely did have a few things you never had to roll for, such as inventing shibari as being a thing in Byrodin.
yeah, totally.
All the girls know it. It's fine.
All the girls know it. It's just lore that was accepted, and that's the thing. It's funny because I was so inexperienced. Maybe now I would be like, oh, can I say this? I don't know. I like to think that I wouldn't feel that way, because part of the joy of working with the people on Critical Role is that they're very open to this kind of stuff. But the more experienced you get, the more you realize like, oh, this is just going to become part of the lore of this town now. Like when I asked Matt and Abria what they, like, what was your character from? I'm like, look, I don't know the map of Exandria, but this is where I want her to be from. I want her to be from a border town that's really kind of contained and its own thing, and it has like a really specific culture to it, but also where she could be the shining star. It's such a small town that like, she has never really been out in the world, and therefore she thinks she's got it. You know what I mean? Well, this works in Byron and I'm the server or whatever. So obviously I can charm anybody or whatever because it worked in my hometown. So, and they were like, oh, that sounds like this town by the road, which is Byron. At that point, I had no idea that Liam and Laura's characters from the first campaign were from Byrodin. So I was just telling them all the stuff that I had sort of written out based on some girls that I knew from this town in Texas called Laredo. And they're like the most fabulous girls I know. They have like the coolest style, and it's not like trendy. Like they don't give a shit about trends. They just wear like feathers all the time, and they're so fabulous and they're so cool. And it is really inspiring to me as like a person. And when I found out they were from this little town, I started asking all these questions, and they have this pageant that they do every year called Las Martas, which is like sort of like a debutante ball, but they instead of dressing in like, cool like quinceañera outfits or whatever, they dress in like full like 18th century like Martha Washington costumes, which is hysterical to me. So and I just loved how in Laredo, like there's, I think it's like the majority of people are like Mexican or Latin, but they do this thing which is like so American, right? Like they dress up as Martha Washington every year. So I just wanted like a town that felt like that. And when I was telling Abria and Matt the story, she was like, oh, that's really interesting. We should, but she didn't tell me we were going back to my hometown. Like I didn't know that when we were playing that game, and she really flushed it out in that nice way. But I sort of like, the only thing I did was plant the seed and tell her about this other town that I was like really interested in visiting, that some of my friends were from. So yeah, now that I'm a little more experienced, maybe I'd think twice about adding like huge chunks of lore like that, but it kind of worked out, and I think people enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, people 100% enjoyed it. Like from what I saw, the community, you pretty much chose one of the most important towns in Exandria, all things considered, because it's one of the Vox Machina towns.
Yeah.
But what you also did is that you created an entire existence for a town everybody wanted meat for, and we had no meat for.
Right.
So
well, I love that, and that's the happy accident of these kinds of playing games, right? It's like, you don't know, sometimes it's like that magic that happens, and it happens, sometimes like on a movie set where you're like, I don't know if this movie's gonna work out, and then something happens, like a great edit or a happy coincidence, or just the story comes together, and that's the power of group storytelling, and sometimes somebody comes in, has no idea what they're doing, and might do something that actually really works, and we can jump, that can be a nice jumping off point.
Yeah. There's nothing, if anything creativity is probably one of the most important things with D&D in general.
Yeah.
Like, not being afraid to take that little bit of a leap to maybe put something through. But definitely being newer to the scene definitely both does and doesn't add to the competence, because like you said, it makes you a little less knowing of things, but it also gives you inspiration to like try things. And then you get a DM going like, sure, yeah, go for it, whatever. And then you say, flip an alligator or a crocodile. Right. I don't remember which one it was.
I think I don't know. I think it's still unclear, but to be clear, like, I only know that works for alligators. I don't know that it works for crocodiles.
Well, whatever it was.
And like, yeah.
All right. Let's see what's next. Oh, I did not space this list out good at all. It's so crowded and my eyes are not good.
Oh no, that's okay. Oh, I got time.
All right. So you mentioned earlier about how some people were like correlating you with some of Opal's decisions earlier on. And obviously that's not true, because you're not an asshole, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. But a lot of people feel at times that tabletop characters can unexpectedly become a bit of an extension of certain aspects of themselves. Is there anything about Opal, or again Denise, which we'll get to her, I swear, that, let's say, are making you inspect or feel things more about, say, your own history or your own personality that you haven't really investigated before?
100%. One thing that always draws me to a character, and I'm not a method actor, if that makes sense to the people listening, meaning like I like to create characters from the inside out, outside in, however I can get in. I like to play people that are different than me. However, when it comes on camera, but when it came to kind of writing your own character, I'm not a writer. So I'm like, I'm going to go with what I know here. And the jumping off point for me was, I don't know what I'm doing really. So I'm not going to play a wizard, you know what I mean? That actually really you should know the spells and you should know whatever. I want to play someone who is, like I said before, like completely new to the world. She's a new soul. She is not an old soul. She's never had another life on this planet. She's brand new, and she's got this magic that she doesn't really understand where it's coming from. And she also has a lot of like untapped sort of like family, childhood sort of, I don't want to call it rage, but just unexplored abandonment issues and things like that. And I thought that was interesting. I don't have a sister, I have a brother, and we are very, very close. And always have been, and that's just, luck of the draw. But I have other relationships in my life, especially when I was younger, that I feel didn't quite prepare me for adulthood, if that makes sense. And so when I moved to LA, which was my version of like leaving, by road in, there was a lot of like naivete and a lot of being green and a lot of just face plant after face plant after face plant. And I think that's a really kind of interesting part of a character's life, which is when you are no longer a child and you're sort of in that late adolescence, early adulthood, and everything that's going to happen to you in those years are so formative to the adult that you will become. I love watching those coming of age stories, and I in a way, like I was as a person, as Aimee, like I was really sort of responsible. I finished college in 2 years because I wanted to move out here and be an actor, and I did sort of everything by the book. And so I thought it might be cool to play a character that sort of just flies by the seat of her pants. And what would it be like to not have all the answers? What would it be like to not be a know-it-all? To kind of be a little bit of like, well, of course it's going to work out for me. Why not? It's worked out for me before. So that's what drew me to this character. And I guess there's some sort of like unprocessed sort of angst that I had about my own coming of age, maybe, that I wanted to explore through April. Like, I don't feel like I got to have those like crazy 20s and whatever. And so that was cool to play kind of like an irresponsible, shoot from the hip young girl who was leaving home for the first time and didn't have a ton of tools other than her own confidence, but it sort of played out in different ways. As far as like, I was confident but like riddled with anxiety in my 20s. You know, I was confident because I didn't know any better, but also I was second guessing myself a lot, even though I projected a lot of confidence. And whereas Opal, you know, I don't think has any anxiety whatsoever. Maybe now as she's getting older, it's sort
Maybe
of realizing, oh yeah, the world doesn't really work out for you all the time. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there were definitely parallels between me and Opal that I tried to kind of explore in a much more personal way than I explore characters that I play on camera, because in that realm, I love to, you know, step into someone else's shoes. I prefer playing characters that I don't think have anything to do with me other than the basic humanity of like, oh, I know what it's like to be lonely, or, oh, I know what it's like to not be taken seriously, or you know, there's always a point of entry, but I would say Opal's probably the most personal character I've played for sure.
Right. Bouncing off of that a little on the subject of, you know, since you brought up naivety to confidence, let's talk about Denise a little bit, finally.
Yeah.
Recently, her story wrapped up for now on Critical Role.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, just in case.
Sure.
But you spoke about the process, you know, you had Denise speak about the process of needing to learn from mistakes, of being burned, and accept the fact that you're going to be burned again, and to not let that stop you. Was that an intentional trait of something you've learned yourself throughout life?
Yeah, I think with Denise, I wanted to play, and I think this is going to be my sort of go-to for tabletop RPGs, which is what, because Matt always starts with the question, what do you want to explore? You know, so what kind of character do you want to explore? What ideas do you want to explore in this character? And I sort of understood what Matt was trying to explore with this arm of the campaign, which is, and I'm speaking for him, he didn't articulate this, but my interpretation is, you know, what happens when the rug is pulled out from under you? What happens when, you know, what if all of a sudden there is a chance where there are no gods? Or what if we can kill all the gods? Or what if like world as we know it and the belief systems as we know it are completely turned upside down? What if there is a revolution for real, right? I don't know. That's my interpretation. I don't know if it's his, but I thought, well, it would be cool to play a character who is a completely self-made person. Like, she intentionally didn't have magic. She is just a martial class. She doesn't rely on the gods in any way, shape, or form. She has a whip of warning because she probably stole it off of someone, but that's as magical as she gets, you know? I think she's like a tough broad, and there are facets of my personality that I feel are that way. I'm a fierce protector. I'm very loyal, to a fault at times. I hate to be burned, and I hold a grudge like nobody else. I'm a Cancer, and I hold grudges for myself. I hold grudges for other people. Like, there, you know, if you told me like that someone cut you off in traffic, I will remember that the next time I talk to you. You know, it's just, you know, it's not my favorite trait about me. However, I do feel like it serves me well because I think it makes me a good friend. As far as like, I fancy myself someone that can read people pretty well. I mean, you know, sometimes I'm wrong, but for the most part, I think I'm a good judge of character. And so I wanted to bring that to Denise because she's not easily taken. I didn't want someone that was like easily sort of like wrapped up in the group think. And, you know, if we're dealing with cults or cultish sort of things, I thought that it would be important to have a person who had no connection to the gods, no loyalty to them whatsoever, and was just sort of like, yeah, you know, I just sort of like I see this is wrong. I'm not saying the other thing is right, but I know this is more wrong than it is right. So we're going to go that way. And having her sort of like understand that there is a spectrum, but being able to make quick decisions was important for me. I don't know if I'm like getting off the rails here, but I thought a lot about somebody who also is really tired of her lifestyle and wants to settle down and get married or have a partner and like not ever have to do a con again, you know, but she just can't get out of the lifestyle right now. Like it's just not a good time. So she's like, you know, running from the Exandrian version of a mob, you know, because she like owes all this money because Dariac sort of like left her high and dry, and she's like looking for him, and really in her mind all she wants to do is, you know, see him and settle down and not lead a life that is interesting at all, that anyone's going to want to follow up on her. You know what I mean? Like, you don't, her goal is to lead a life that is not interesting enough for television, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
So I don't know. I think that I just thought that was like a cool thing to explore as I get older too. Like me personally am thinking about the balance of personal life and professional life, and investing more in my personal life rather than chasing the next project, or, you know, being so relentless about professional success. Because in the end, what I feel as a person after having been, you know, through the COVID era, and we're still kind of in it, but it really, like, once your life slows down to that degree, you realize, oh, well, the thing that's important is, like, you know, the people I surround myself with. And if I can't see them, I can't be around them, you know, how important it is to feel that connection. And hopefully many years from now, when I'm on my deathbed, I don't think I'm going to care so much about all the cool movies I booked. I will care more about like the people that I surrounded myself with, and the connections I made with them. I hope, you know.
you can only hope.
Yeah.
Bouncing off of your little talk just now about Opal and Denise respectively, let me ask you if you know of the little rule in like the D&D community of no D&D is better than bad D&D, where you shouldn't sweat yourself or force yourself to be in a situation if it's not comfortable, because a lot of D&D comes from trust. Do you
Interesting.
Do you think that over your 2 or so years of playing so far, that there's positive therapeutic or even mental health aspects to being in the community?
Oh my God, yes. It's so funny because I really did, like a lot of things in my life, when something is sort of like meant to be, it usually comes to me when I'm not pushing so hard for it, if that makes sense. And so D&D sort of came to me as like, I was chatting with my friend Sam, and he was like, you want to play? Like, we have guests sometimes. And I was like, yeah, sure. I didn't know anything about it. So it really fell on my lap. And I'm so grateful that it did. And there's a little piece of me that is sad it didn't come to me earlier, especially when I was like a teenager or even a kid, because I think it could have unlocked so many things for me when I was a younger person. I think that through playing, what you were saying about trust, right? Like, I've been so fortunate to really only play with the Critical Role people. And I also got to play with N.D. Stevenson and his wife Molly and Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who maybe you don't know who those people are, but they're all Shira people. And before I went on for my like zero session for Critical Role, they came over and did like a quick little thing. So I've only really played with friends, and friends that really were super experienced in the game, and like kind of get the reason we do it is because we want to connect, because we need to make it a safe space so that I hope it didn't stop. Did it stop the it's lost connection. Let me start. Hold on. Okay.
Only the video stopped. It took a second for the mic to pick back up, but it's good.
Okay, cool. Let me just text my husband on Zoom. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Call you later. Okay. Sorry, where was I? Yeah. So I've been fortunate. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to play with people who really understand D&D and play it for the love of it, you know, and So I've never felt like I was in a situation where it was like an unsafe environment or toxic in any way. So I come from that super position of privilege. Like, what a privilege to, like, my first D&D experience was with like not only like professional D&D players, but also the legitimately kindest people on the planet that I've ever met. So I agree with that. I've never heard of the no D&D is better than bad D&D, but I completely agree, because it is therapeutic. And when something is inherently therapeutic, you can let the bad in with the good, if that makes sense. A bad experience, if it's not, I don't want to say a DM is a therapist, because obviously you don't want to put that pressure on your D. Absolutely not. You know what I mean? Everybody's an adult and is responsible for their own sort of, how they deal with those things. But, if you don't have like a curator that you can trust for those experiences, like a good DM, or you hit like a nerve that's really emotional or really triggering for you, and that can happen during D&D. I mean, it happens to us all the time. Like when you see, us crying it's because we really care for those characters. We really care what's happening. It's not because we're like pushing out a tear because we're actors, So I think that when you deal with in something that can be very truly emotional for you, it has to be safe, because if it's not safe, then you can get really scarred by that. And if you don't have proper like aftercare, or if you don't have like a supportive team around you of friends or players that kind of like want to check in on you, then it can really kind of mess you up. Like I've, even with Opal or Denise or some of the stuff that's happened in the games, like I've thought about it the next day. I wake up thinking like, man, that sucks for X character, or that sucks for, whatever. And you sort of miss them, like they're your friends when they're gone. So yeah, I think it can absolutely be therapeutic. And I was listening to something on NPR, like maybe it was like, wait, don't tell me, where there are therapists out there that are using tabletop role-playing games in order to kind of process, people's feelings. And I think that's so cool and so valid. But that's why it's so important that it be like a good non-toxic environment.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that, because there is, again, the whole aspect of trust. And it's like anything, there needs to be consent and there needs to be checks and balances. Otherwise, it can really mess you up.
Yeah. That's something that I've learned too with this game, because it's so easy, because it is sort of imaginary. And if you're coming into it from an actor's perspective, there are things that like, you're like, oh, it's just a story. Like, it's just imaginary. And so the first things to kind of like go are the ideas of like consent or whatever, because we've been so brainwashed by watching like every romantic comedy you've ever seen or whatever, where it's like, one person chases the other person relentlessly while the other person is like, no, I don't want it. I don't want to be with you. And it's like, well, they get him at the end. And so we've been sort of brainwashed into thinking like that's love, or like that's a cool story, or that's, whatever. And I think now as a society, we're sort of like waking up to, just because those are the stories, how we used to tell stories before, it doesn't mean that that's how we should tell stories moving forward. So I think that it's made me, I think certainly has enriched my understanding of consent and making sure that when you are in a creative and imaginative space, it can still feel personal. And so you still have to be really careful.
Exactly. Since we talked about, how it has had positive effects for you and the bonds or even increased bonds you've made throughout the whole process, do you think you would have regretted it 2 years ago if you had decided against Sam's like offer to like, come try and play the game with us? And, considering everything that's happened and every bond you've made, do you think you really would have regretted it if you could talk to one version of you from years ago who's about to go like, hey, I'm not going to do this. Oh, well.
Yeah. Well, I had those second thoughts, because once I realized, because he was like, oh, you want to come play this game? To be honest, like I grew up like in Miami in the 90s, like satanic panic was everywhere. So like I went to a Catholic school. We couldn't even read Harry Potter. Like we couldn't even watch Lord of the Rings. Like it was ridiculous, right? Because everybody was like, Satan is everywhere. And so I had no idea what Dungeons and Dragons was, only that when I was younger, it was like the thing that like Satanists played in their basements. My parents were never like don't play Dungeons and Dragons. It was just not a part of my like, I was like in musical theater, and actually the Venn diagram of like musical theater lovers and D&D players was like a circle, but I didn't know that at the time. So I actually, it was not in my sphere of anything at the time. So when I heard about it, I honestly thought it was like a board game, to be honest with you. So I was like, okay, sure. And then when I met with Matt and he gave me the player's handbook, I was like, oh no, this is a whole language, and it's not supposed to be knowable in a week or in a day. Like, it can take years. It's so great about the game. It's so enriching, you can just keep adding to it and adding and adding and adding. And it's been decades, right? So there's all this stuff to know. And I was like, well, I haven't even cracked the surface by the time I played my first game. So there was a big part of me that was like, I don't think I should do this. So I would say to that version of me, like, don't deny yourself this experience, because there's like some embarrassing flubs, and you're gonna fall on your face in a public way, but like, that's okay. That means that you're doing something that matters to you. And I think I'm always of the mind, it's like better to try something scary than regret not having done it. I'm not talking about like jumping out of a plane. I'm not adventurous at all in a physical sense, but like when it comes to taking emotional risks, I'm a big fan of that. So I would have 100% regretted not, doing it. It's opened up such a cool like door in my life. And my only regret or wish is that I'd started sooner, but, can't go back in time. So.
Yeah. That 100% makes, a lot of sense, because usually everybody who plays D&D wishes they could have started it sooner, or that they hadn't discovered it sooner.
Yeah, it just brings so much joy, but also like if I had started sooner, it's like playing the piano or something. If you start when you're a kid, like maybe I could like feel confident enough to play like a level 15 wizard. Like, I don't know, like that would be so rad to me. But I feel like I don't know if I'm ever going to be good enough. But yeah, so that's part of it too. It's like the longer you do it, the more confident you get and all of that. And also as you get older, like it's hard to find a game, to join into or campaign. Like, people have lives and children and jobs, so it's hard to find like a steady way to do the hobby,
Well, yeah, it definitely is. I can 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
I've been trying for 3 years to find a game, and none of them ever lasted more than like 2.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
It's a heartbreak for sure.
All I know is that I got pretty dice and a Kirby bag to hold the dice in, so that's what matters.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah, I'm like definitely a dice hoarder, like, but I do give them away a lot too. So like it's funny because before I started, Critical Role, like I said, I thought Dungeons and Dragons was a board game. So, but now, like, even when in my non-D&D life, like I did a movie earlier in the year, and there was this like PA we had, was production assistant, and she was always like really quiet around me. I thought she didn't like me, and I was like, God, that's so weird. Like, I wonder what I could do to like get her to open up. And then finally one day somebody came up to me like, no, she does like you. She's just like a big fan of Critical Role. And I was like, oh. And for some reason I thought she was just like really just didn't like me. She was really quiet around me. And so the next day I brought her some of my like custom made opal dice. And it was such a joy to be able to give that to her. So like whenever I find someone, even if it's like my Starbucks barista or whatever, who like loves Critical Role, I'll like find a way to give them some dice. So I take on a lot of dice, but I also give away a lot of dice. So I'm not a total hoarder.
So you're kind of like, I'm probably saying the reference wrong, but you're kind of like the Nurse Joy of like the D&D world. You're just handing out dice everywhere.
Just handing out dice, the Santa, if you will, of, yeah. I mean, because it does feel unlike anything else in my life. It feels like an understanding, almost like a siblinghood, I was never in like a sorority or anything like that in college, but I would imagine that that's the same feeling, when you have a secret handshake or something, or people like, have a secret code word. I feel like such a kinship with people that play D&D that I want to give them stuff, I want to talk about it all the time.
It's a real sense of like community and belonging, pretty much.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Well, on the topic of that, can I ask you if you met someone who is, wanting to learn to play tabletop, be it D&D or Pathfinder or any of the other games out there, but if they were hesitant to, mess things up or not be good at it, is there anything you'd want to say to that person?
Yes, I would say just go for it, because the beauty of the game, and I know because I spend so much time talking about like I'm still a new player, and I think that has to do with like my own baggage of like being a performer and an actor and wanting to like be performance ready all the time. You know what I mean? Like you're gonna come, you know, pay $300 to see me in a Broadway show, I better hit the notes. You know what I mean? So I do feel that pressure as a performer. But I will say, as a player, the thing that it's taught me is like, this isn't a performance. It's like the oldest communal experience, which is, I'm sure at some point, some, you know, caves people sat around a fire and told a story together. And that is like the original form of entertainment. So it does feel very sort of like, on a base human level, like very enriching. And, you know, when you're coming up with something on the fly, it's not going to be polished. It's not going to be perfect. And that's kind of the beauty. And sometimes, you know, the flubs make for great storytelling. And, you know, and I think a cool thing too about it is it teaches you how to be vulnerable around your teammates or the people you're playing with, because, you know, if you have everything down perfect, or if you come, God forbid, with a plan of what you want to do, which is like the cardinal sin of, you know, improvisation. If you do, then you kind of like rob yourself of the experience of being like, oh my gosh, I just tripped and fell on my face figuratively around these people. And guess what? They all still love me. They all think we're great. It's totally safe. We can laugh about it. You know, we can move on, or we can talk about it for years on end. You know, we have inside jokes at Critical Role that we still like bug each other about. And it's, you know, stuff that came up like little flubs like during gameplay. And it's almost like that's the only, they always say that there's no wrong way or right way to play. But I think like the absolute wrong way to play is to, you know, think that you have to be perfect at it. You know, being a little bit messy is kind of the fun, and that leaves a lot of room for creativity and for exploration and for discovery.
So essentially, there has to be an openness to collaboration overall.
I think so. I think being closed off is kind of like the enemy of creativity. You know, sometimes you don't feel super creative, or you're in a bad mood, or I'm talking about myself, you know, and I like show up to work and I'm like, man, I just don't, it's not good. It's not good. I need to like open myself up, because and maybe I'm getting like too actory here, but like as a performer, you can sense, you know, when you're out there giving something to someone, energy or whatever it is, and you are met with you know, you're met with the energy of like someone crossing their hands and kind of being like, no thanks, I don't want it. It's like a brick wall. That is the ultimate, like, you know, kind of like, ugh, you know, it's like banging your head against a wall. You're kind of like putting all this energy in, and when it's not reciprocated, it can be really frustrating and devastating. So I think whatever you have to do to get yourself in a space of openness, whether it's like doing a silly dance or some like, you know, movement or some warm-ups or whatever, like, I think that openness is key. If there's one thing you bring, you know, you can bring your bad mood, but make sure it's a bad mood that's open to something else as well, not a closed offness, because then no one's going to have a good time.
Totally. So, bit of an improv question here, which I think fits, all things considered.
Sure.
If you had to sum up your whole journey so far from a novice player to the player you are now in, say, a paragraph worth of words, how would you sum it up?
My journey? Well, I still consider myself a novice player, but I do now have a little bit of a pathway and a ground plan for how to improve. So I've learned stuff that really works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but I have like a flow chart that I do now for combat, which is really super helpful for me. I'm a very visual person. And so if I'm playing Denise, for example, I'm like, these are the 3 things you can do. But if you do that, that's your bonus action. You can't do that. You know, like little reminders for myself. So I think that I don't know if I'll ever feel like I've hit the bottom of the barrel of things to know about tabletop role-playing games, and I think that's good because the sky's the limit. That's the whole point. There is no ceiling, as it were. But my journey has been one of like just total giddy, childlike exploration, dotted with a lot of mistakes and flubs, but overall, just, I would say, a totally enriching experience that I wish to continue forever.
So there's really no end to it at all, or at least no end that you might want.
I hope not. I mean, it is hard for me to get on a game. So like, it's maybe that too. I think if I was playing every week, maybe I'd want to like take the summer off or like, play another character or whatever. But because I only get to play in these short bursts, it is totally like a special treat for me. So I haven't gotten tired of it yet. And I don't think I will, because it's different every time,
Do you have like any closing remarks you want to give, or like, I don't know, I don't know who's going to hear this, but like, I don't know, anything you want to bring attention to or something?
I mean, no, I think, thank you for asking me to talk about it. I so rarely get to chat about, what I consider like a passion hobby of mine, which is, playing Dungeons and Dragons. So thank you for asking me to. And if you have any follow-up questions, or if you forgot something, you can always DM me and I'll answer. But yeah, I think that's good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is great.